Previously on Too Old to Rodeo. In my last video I had a viewer tell me they had no idea what I was doing. Here's a brief recap. I'm building a rear differential for my 1976 Nova 2-door. I started with a Ford 8.8 differential from a 2000 Ford Explorer. I cut off both of the 8.8 ends, narrowed the rear diff, and welded on Moser 7750 Ford 9-inch ends. I welded the axle tubes to the center section. I added a drain hole and drain plug to the bottom of the center section. I built the center section using a Richmond Gear 410 gear set and a Detroit True Track posi center section. Now I'm getting ready to install Moser axles and brake kits to finish up the Nova rear differential. Real quick here, just to give you an idea of what this cost. My Moser axle 31 spline with the custom measurements. The price for the two axles was $449. The bearing in the 5/8 stud package was $165, and they did press the bearings onto the axles for me for free and shipped them that way. They put an access hole in the end of the axle and there was no charge for that. I did have the axles drilled with both the Ford and the Chevy standard bolt patterns. That was an additional $30. I think they said $35 on their website in order form, but they only charged me $30 for drilling the additional bolt pattern. I went ahead and got both inner seals. I guess some people don't run the inner seals. They just count on that rubber O-ring on the bearing to keep them from leaking. But for $12 it seemed like good insurance to me. The Ford Economy brake kit was $605. A universal brake hose kit was $85. And then the e-brake cable was $145. So my total for the axles and the brake kits was $1,710.78. It shipped 2 days after I ordered it, and I think I got it 2 days later. I think it was 2-day shipping. It came via FedEx. One other thing, the very first part of the instructions before you put your axles in is to put your T-bolts in to the housing flange. This kit, none of what I ordered came with those T-bolts. You have to order those as a separate item. So that held me up for about a week because I was working on it on a Sunday and realized I didn't have the T-bolts. I called them on Monday, placed the order. They shipped them the next day, and it took a couple days to get here. So make sure you include your T-bolts in your order. One thing I was nervous about when I started this process, I downloaded Moser's order form for ordering custom axles, and it can be pretty overwhelming, but just know that you don't need to necessarily fill that out, and definitely don't need all those dimensions. For me, it was pretty easy to order these axles, and the guys at Moser were very helpful. I called them. I had the order form in front of me. What they needed to know what differential or what rear differential I was starting with, which I told them it was a Ford 8.8 from a 2000 Ford Explorer, but that I had cut off both ends and welded on 9-inch ends, so they needed to know what 9-inch end, which I bought my 9-inch ends from Moser. They were the 7750 ends, so that helped. Once they knew that I'd gotten my ends from them and it was a 7750, that gave them, all the bearing size, all those things. Other than that, the only other thing they really needed for the axles were 3 dimensions. They want the dimension from the center of the differential to the outside of the housing end, both sides, and then they want a total dimension from one housing end to the other. Those dimensions, the 2 sides, need to add up to the full length. That's pretty obvious. I had emailed Moser a picture of this rear end ruler that I'm using, and the guy told me to be sure and measure from the differential center line to the housing end, not the housing center line and not the pinion center line, but the differential center line was what he wanted me to use to the end of the outside of the 7750 end. The last thing they wanted was info on the brake setup, which again, I was buying the brake setup at the same time. I went with the Ford Economy brake set, which incidentally comes with a GM caliper. But anyway, because I got my axles, my brakes, my brake rotors, my brake calipers, all that, that gave them all the info they needed, and everything fit fine. My only complaint was the hardware package that came with the caliper brackets. I'm getting my axles ready to install into my differential. I've already installed the seals in both ends. Some people don't run those seals. These Ford 9-inch, they have a sealed bearing with an O-ring. I say this O-ring is enough to keep the end from leaking. However, I have the seals and I don't see any reason not to go ahead and put them in. At any rate, I'm getting ready to screw the studs in. My axles are drilled for either a Chevy or a Ford bolt pattern, so I've got to make sure. I'm planning on using Chevy rims, so I've got to make sure I use the right holes. Screw the studs in from the back, put a little Loctite on them. Then there's a sleeve goes on this side. But first, all these holes on this side, the wheel side, there's some little burrs. So I've got a deburring tool I'm going to take and run in here to try to cut off these burrs. I am using 5/8 studs, and these have the low profile head to avoid interfering with the brakes. The directions say to run this down to within 1/4 of an inch, and then put a little bit of Loctite on it, and then run it the rest of the way in and torque it to 50 foot-pounds. something extra in the paycheck this week. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Turner.
You're welcome, Mr. Turner.
Next, these little sleeves go on, and Moser gives you a tool to install those. It's a little notch in the end, and then this tool has a little notch to, I can see it, to get down on there. This lug bolt kit comes with these aluminum spacers and also the lug nuts. First issue I had was with the nuts on the bolts that bolt the caliper bracket to the flange. The nuts they sent me, and I'll show you a picture here, they were all messed up. In manufacturing, somebody had some major problem and they would not screw on. If you tried to use a wrench thinking that you're going to straighten out the threads on the nut, it just started to screw up the threads on the bolt. It was Memorial Day when I was working on this, so there weren't a lot of stores open, but all the hardware stores in my area did not have this thread. This thread is an M10 by 1. All the stores had an M10 by 1.25 or an M10 by 1.5, but they did not have the M10 by 1 thread. So I had to order those online. Took a couple days to get them. That slowed me down. And then the second problem was the bolts. With using the bushing for the spacer, I guess it's a spacer, not really a bushing, the spacer that was required to get the center of my caliper and the center of my rotor, with the new nuts, they wouldn't tighten down completely. There weren't enough threads on the bolt. And the instructions that came with it even says that if that is an issue, to stack washers on this back side. So I wasn't real happy with that. I thought they could have done a better job providing a bolt that would work with any of the 3 spacer combinations. But they didn't. You can see for the test fit that for some of these I didn't have enough washers, so I actually just took a bigger nut and put on there so I could tighten these brackets down, because when I was originally trying to fit them and I couldn't get the caliper in the center of the rotor, the reason is because this bracket was just wobbling back and forth. And you really have to get that tightened down before you can, determine the right spacer and get everything else set up. But other than that hardware problem, everything went together well. Okay, I've got my test fitting done, everything put together to make sure it was going to work. You can see I've got a mark there in the middle of the brake caliper, and it's pretty much centered on the rotor. Got my brake pads in. I didn't adjust the caliper because I'm going to take all this apart. I'm going to paint the caliper, I'm going to paint the center of my rotors, and maybe even some of the axle, just places that commonly rust, especially where parts fit together and tend to want to rust together and lock up. I'm going to try to get some of that painted. They tell you not to paint anything before you test fit it, because if something is wrong or doesn't fit, they won't take parts back if they've been painted or powder coated or whatever.